Okay, we're recording. So, a moment for each of us to check in what mood we're bringing. Um, I'll start. I'm REA. I live here on the California coast at Half Moon Bay, California. The mood I'm bringing is I'm very curious and interested to see how Mary's work about giving voice to values will relate to the situation and feelings that many of us have now post-US election, and how we create safe, positive spaces for these kinds of conversations. So that's me. I'm gonna move around the screen based on where I see you. Debbie, you're next. So yeah, so you can unmute yourself over there by toggling. There you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm also curious to find out what you have to say. I mean, this is values is something I believe very strongly, and I'm always interested to hear how we can inculcate values in our generation and the next generation, and especially business, which is such a cutthroat operation. I'm interested in how you can inculcate values in businesses. It's very, very interesting subject.
Your name and where you are?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm Debbie Shapiro, and I'm speaking from Jerusalem, Israel, part of the world.
Thank you, Debbie. Len, you're muted.
Mary, good morning and welcome to this new constellation for you. My name is Len, L-E-N, and my wife is Libby Traubman. We live in San Mateo, California, just 20 minutes south of San Francisco. And we are in our 50th year together. So necessarily we have been interested forever in giving voices and ears, not only in our relationship, but to people around the globe, and for about 35 years have brought together adversaries, beginning with Soviets and Americans. My tone right now is I feel mobilized and activated to bring people together. Libby and I and others are planning to bring diverse people in our county together in January for a community dialogue and to move into action. And part of it is based in the results of the recent election, which show to me that there are a vast number of people who are invisible to us and feel invisible and feel neglected and do not generally have voices and sometimes communicate badly. And so it is our great task now to discover one another and engage. So I'm very interested in what you have to communicate about giving voices and ears to people. Thank you.
Thank you, Len. Wendy.
I'm Wendy, and I'm upstairs from REA. And I'm exhausted at the moment, yet also ready to become mobilized. Right before the election, I finally lost it at somebody, and one day before the election. And after that, I was thinking, I really need this conference because with all the work and exposure to all the values of service-based and all the wonderful work that Len and Libby are doing and peacemaking, I lost it. And looking forward to finding positive ways of giving voice to my values. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm glad you didn't lose it at me, but that's okay. Jyoti.
I'm Jyoti Bachani. I'm a faculty member at St. Mary's College of California. I first came across Mary's work when Mary Radalis, who was my student at the time, mentioned it in my class. I ended up writing a book on managing nonprofits with Mary Radalis, and we both also wrote an article on leadership as listening. And then I met Mary at the Humanistic Management Network pre-conference in Montreal last year at the Academy of Management. And I was simply blown away. So I'm bringing a mood of great admiration for Mary's life's work and hoping to take away that inspiration to make the work that I've been doing more aligned with what she has been putting out into the world, and have, along with the Humanistic Management Network, sort of a coalition of people who share those values and are not afraid to say them and put them out in the public domain and be advocate for those things, because there's a lot of fear. And I used to go around declaring myself as a fearless woman, but I shouldn't have done that, because this week has been one where there is a sense of dread. And I found myself unable to comfort and console the college kids in the family who are far away on the East Coast and witnessing incidents that terrify them, and I'm not able to give them a hug and offer comfort. So there's some of that mood that I'm bringing, and I've spent a good part of the week educating myself on privilege, race, some of the history of the country, and thinking a lot about that. So that's my mood this morning. Thank you for hosting. Happy to be here.
Thank you, Jody. Really happy to have you with us this morning. Ofu.
Thank you very much. My name is Ofu James. I'm speaking from Ivory Coast in West Africa. I am so passionate about bringing people together, bringing diversities together. I founded an NGO here in Ivory Coast since 2012. And this NGO is designed to organize series of activities that promote inclusion and facilitate reconciliation. I am so much passionate about the topic of this gathering today, giving voices to values. And from experience, what we have been practicing, the things we have been giving voices to values from disenfranchised sets of people in our society that feel stigmatized, reject, and I feel that as a global citizen, it's our responsibility to continue taking their hands and bringing them together and enabling them to counter the fears and ignorance that separate divisively, that create the fears. And I believe that what is around the globe today, we as a global citizen, locally or internationally, there are many people that are afraid of the future and are so terrified about the future. And we believe that our responsibility is still to deepen our understanding on the web of life that holds all humanity together, and foster, continue a platform that can facilitate bringing these diversities together to go through, transcend these fears and ignorance that have been so deepening divisively. So I am so glad to participate in this gathering, and I'm very glad to hear the speaker speaking today. Thank you very much.
Glad to have you with us. And I see we have a new person who has joined us, Halaimo Nyang. Is this someone that you invited, Jyoti? Oh, anyway, welcome. Mr. Nyang, am I pronouncing your name right? Halaimo?
No. Nine.
Nyang.
He's in Myanmar. He's in Mandalay, Myanmar. And he is a relationship builder and facilitator and a great teacher there.
Welcome. Welcome. We've just been checking in. Len, I take it that he is a friend of yours. Myanmar. Wow. Okay. Welcome to our conversation. We have each just checked in, and the 30 seconds said a little bit about the. Can you hear me? Maybe we'll just give him a little. We'll give you a little time to settle in, and there'll be time to speak later. I want to now move on to the next part of our conversation, where our conversation with Mary, followed by a chance for each of you to respond. And I am going to just go through a brief introduction of Mary. There's also material on the web that we posted. But Mary the thing about her is she's really dedicated her career to supporting leaders in creating workplaces and communities where people can act openly and authentically based on their own values. That's the core. She's creator and director of Giving Voice to Values, which is a pioneering business curriculum for values-driven leadership. It was launched at the Aspen Institute and the Yale School of Management, and is now hosted at the University of Virginia, Darden School of Business, where Mary's a professor of practice. She's also author of the book, Giving Voice to Values, published by the Yale University Press. The program curriculum is actually offered for free to educators around the world and has been featured in the Financial Times, Harvard Business Review, Stanford Social Innovation Review, McKinsey Quarterly, etc., and has been piloted at more than 830 business schools, companies, and organizations globally. The book provides an action-oriented manifesto for individuals to feel empowered to voice and act on their values, to live with integrity, fight for one's convictions, and build more ethical workplaces and communities. There's an extensive online curriculum of reading, case studies, exercises, a series of interactive online social cohort-based modules. What Mary says is that our work is not about persuading people to be more ethical. Rather, it starts from the premise that most of us already want to act on our values, but we need to feel that we have a reasonable chance of doing so effectively and successfully, and our approach is about raising those odds. Welcome, Mary, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
So let's see. Can you tell us a little bit about what your organization, Giving Voice to Values, is up to in recent months?
Sure. Thanks a lot. And thank you all for being here. I found your opening comments really touching. And I have to say, I've just got back, Arye knows this, I just got back late last night from Europe, where I spent the week during all of the various responses to the US election. Don't worry, I did vote. I was thinking before I left, gee, it's too bad that this webinar is on Sunday. I'll be jet lagged, I'll be tired. I was feeling a little like, oh, I made the wrong choice to schedule it then. And then actually Thursday, Friday, and then even more yesterday, I was thinking, oh, I'm so looking forward to this conversation because I felt like I needed it. So I want to thank you all for coming and being here. In terms of what's going on with Giving Voice to Values these days, I know some of you already are quite familiar with it, and Arye did a really nice sort of introduction. But what I spend all my time doing is traveling around internationally. I'm traveling almost every week, sharing, giving voice to values. Initially, it was always with business schools because it was designed as a curriculum for business education. But increasingly now, I'm also meeting with a lot of business companies and also other organizations. So, for example, to give you a taste, this week I was in Amsterdam spending the day with a group of business faculty at The View, which is the second largest and most well respected of the private universities there. And then on Friday, I was in Munich with a group of about 24 corporate executives from major German-based multinationals. And so those are the kinds of audiences. But then I've also been spending more time with, I was in Australia a few weeks ago working with nurses and nursing education, particularly in the field of palliative care. And I've started doing some work with law school professors. I worked with the police force in the state of Queensland in Australia. I've been working with the U.S. military on their leadership development. So the work has been expanding and growing. I guess having moved recently to the University of Virginia at Darden, the reason for that move, although I'm still based physically in Boston, is that I was thinking I want to make sure there's a legacy for the GVV work. I mean, I believe in it. I think of it as an idea. That's why we make it available for free. I think no one owns ideas, and what I really want to do is make an impact. So I was looking for an institution that would be committed enough to the ideas to keep it going even when I'm not doing the work that I do now. And I think I've found that in the Darden School of Business. They're very excited. They're a school that's been known for years for their commitment to integrating values-driven leadership into their business program. And they see GVV as kind of business ethics 2.0. You get beyond the cognitive and you get to the action orientation of it. So that's a lot of what I've been doing. So I'll stop there.
So thanks, Mary. Can you make it a little more concrete for us? Can you give us an example? Like you go around to all these places, to universities, businesses. Give us an example the past week of the kind of issue that you were working on and why people wanted you there.
Yeah, I think this past week was probably, it was fine, but it was more at the early stages. So maybe I'll give you an example of some work I did a few months ago that I think had gone a little further. It might be a more interesting story because it's further along. I was approached by Unilever, the major corporation, multinational. They have been doing a lot of work around leadership and values for their senior executives. But they realized that you really need to bring this down into the whole organization. And one of their leadership development people had heard me speak at Harvard Business School. So they thought, gee, maybe giving voice to values, or GVV as I call it, might be a useful approach. And the strategy that they've adopted is they wanted to invite the managing director, the head of one of their regional or country offices, to pilot this approach. So they issued the invitation, and the senior executive who put up his hand was the head of the Nigeria office. And so last year they invited me to come out and spend a week in Lagos and to meet with a lot of the executives, to do interviews and focus groups to try and understand what their conflicts were, what their challenges were in the business there, which of course are even greater now due to the price of oil and some of the impact that's had on the economy there. And then after doing that reconnaissance, we went back, we sort of customized the GVV curriculum. We created cases that were specific to their situations. And then we invited all of the senior management team, which is about a dozen people, and a group of about 35 hand-picked middle managers to go through the online modules as preparation for my going back down and spending a couple days with them a few months later, 4 or 5 months later, where we did a train the trainer sort of session. The idea was that we were getting all the managers familiar with the Giving Voice to Values approach, and then those middle manager change champions have now delivered the training that we designed to the rest of the organization they're now following up on that by having a communication strategy where they're inviting people on a regular basis to share examples of times when they've encountered values conflicts and either have found an effective way to voice and act on their values so that people can learn from that, or are asking for input and sort of collecting and sharing those stories. The other thing they did that I'll just mention and I'll stop again is that somebody mentioned an emphasis on listening, which has become, I think, really important, especially when I work with GVV and I end up working with the senior leaders too. A lot of what I say to them is, you just as any employee wants to practice and rehearse how to voice their values effectively, you need to practice and rehearse how to hear it when they bring it to you, because it's never a welcome message. It's always time-consuming, often expensive. It's usually bad news in some way, often delivered with some emotion. And so when I was in Nigeria, we put the senior leadership team in the same room with the middle managers. And after we introduced GVV method to them, and we gave them scenarios to work on, we asked all the middle managers to talk to each other about how could they raise these issues effectively within the organization. But we asked the senior leaders to talk to each other about how could a middle manager bring this issue to me in a way that would make it easier for me to respond effectively. So they were answering different questions about the same scenario. One was about, delivering, one was about reflecting on how can I hear it. And then when they came back to talk together, there was a kind of natural social contracting that kind of emerged. And they created what they called the GVV deal, which was a signed commitment on the senior leadership team saying, if you can raise these issues with us in these ways, we will commit to listen. And the middle manager saying, if you will listen, we will commit to raise issues in these ways. And so there's a kind of, a two-way conversation going on. So that's kind of an example. I could give you others, but I'll stop.
Yeah. I just noticed we had a question from Debbie, which I think is an interesting question, is can you give a concrete example of the kinds of issues that are raised? What is it, in an example that people might be disagreeing about?
Yeah. So one of the ideas, it's a great question. One of the ideas behind GVV is that we're focusing, usually people say if you're going to talk about ethics and values, don't focus on the clear-cut, right, wrong, so-called black and white issues. Focus on the gray issues that are trickier, the ethical dilemmas. I actually have changed my mind about that because I've decided that the gray issues, and we will get to this because it relates to some of the current political scene, but the gray issues are issues where often reasonable people of goodwill can legitimately disagree. That's why they're gray. But nevertheless, there are a lot of issues where most of us would agree it's not right, it's not appropriate, it's illegal, it's fraudulent, it's abusive, whatever. But nevertheless, many of us don't think it's possible to act effectively, or we make other decisions about it. And so since Giving Voice to Values is about focusing on action planning and scripting and rehearsing, we actually will start with the so-called clear-cut issues because we want people to focus on action. And if we only focus on the dilemmas, we never get to action and we just go around and around on the dilemma. Ironically, if you get better at acting on these and scripting and talking about these clear-cut issues, it actually, I think, makes people better at dealing with the gray issues too. But if for pedagogical purposes, we've reversed the sequence. So an example is in the so-called clear-cut issues. In business, for example, there are often situations where people are pressured to do what they call cooking the books, tampering with the accounting and the reporting, whether it's of financial results, whether it's of customer numbers, whether it's a number of clicks on a website, lots of ways they count these things. And there are all kinds of billable hours, inflating your billable hours. There are lots of ways in business where people will sort of manipulate the numbers they're reporting on a whole raft of topics. And it's pretty clearly wrong. You know, it's often against the law. It's sometimes against accounting standards. Sometimes it's just against corporate policy. And it certainly isn't, it doesn't have integrity. But there are lots of reasons why it happens, and there's lots of rationalizations for it. And so that would be the kind of example that and so people are often pressured to do it. They know that it's probably not appropriate, but they really don't know how to say no, especially if it's their boss who's asking them to do it. In Nigeria, I'll give you an example. There was one of the managers who was taking me around on my first visit to Lagos. She was sort of my host while I was there. Wonderful woman, really impressive. And she was, you know, sitting in on all of the interviews and all of the focus groups. And at the last day of my visit, I had about an hour before I was going to the airport, and she said, "Could I have this hour?" And I said, "Sure." So we sat down, and she said, "Well, I've been listening to you all week, and you know, there's a number of issues that have come up with me recently in my job, and I know they're wrong, and I've just basically punted. I haven't known how to deal with them, even though I know I should be doing something. Can we rehearse and script together?" So I said, "Sure." So she told me this story about how there's a corporate policy at Unilever, which comes from the top, that whatever kind of waste product you have is not supposed to be put into the general landfill. It's supposed to be disposed of in an environmentally responsible way. And she said that, but this was made at corporate in the UK. And she said, here in Nigeria, there's actually a law, you know, that says that you have to use the government contractors to dispose of your waste. Now, there's various opportunities for corruption there, of course. And it turns out that the government contractors deposit the waste in the landfill. So she said when she was doing a contract with a third-party vendor who was going to be doing some of their waste disposal, he said, "Well, I have the option here to disobey the law in order to comply with your corporate policies, or to obey the law and not comply with your corporate policies. You know, I'm stuck between a rock and a hard place. How do I deal with this?" And, you know, she basically said, she just kind of said, "Just sign it," you know, and she knew that wasn't right. She knew she was basically, as a representative of the company, basically telling him to lie on this contract, right? And she didn't feel comfortable with it.
So how did your program address this situation?
So we talked together and just sort of started brainstorming about the scripting, the clear case. She knew what was right. So we talked about the fact that this was a situation where clearly the intent was good on all parties' sides, but the way the situation played out, it was encouraging people to be deceptive and to, you know, to lie or break rules. So what we did is we talked about who she could raise this issue with effectively within Unilever, because she supported Unilever's environmental responsibility policies, but it looked like they needed to think a little bit more locally to figure out this may be more of an incremental process in a place like Nigeria where the law, you know, they also are supposed to obey the local laws. So we basically scripted and talked about who she should speak with, how she could present it. And I was back a few months later and she reported that she had done so and that actually it had started a good conversation where they're trying to adapt the policy within the organization to not just say never mind about environmental responsibility, but to be a little bit more incremental, realistic, and committed to a locally sensitive application of the rules so that they can move toward their ultimate goal without putting people in the position where they're kind of requiring them to deceive somebody.
Okay. You know, per our conversation, Mary, a little before we got started today, I want to shift the focus now and try getting at this issue from another viewpoint, and that is, what about, you know, the kinds of conversations that many of us may be having right now within local groups or local communities or even workplaces since the election and all of the upset that's triggered, you know, in people in the U.S. and also around the world. You know, just a couple of local examples here. Wendy and I belong to a local community organization, and we were there a few nights ago, and there was a discussion. And the presenter was a Muslim leader who is a Republican, and people got people in the group who were Bernie Sanders supporters got very upset. How can you be a Muslim and a Republican at the same time? Don't you realize you voted for somebody, you know? And it was very hard to keep the room under control. A more personal situation is Wendy and I were having a conversation recently with family members about what they were going to do about, you know, President-elect Trump. And there was one member of the family who was just outraged at the whole situation and was outraged at the rest of us because we weren't angry enough about the situation, you know, and it's very explosive. And so, you know, I'm wondering how giving voice to values might, you know, you were talking about very large, complex, multi-levels of management, big global organizations. Is there anything about this that applies, you know, to a group of people sitting in the same room, talking to each other during these times?
Yeah. So, you know, obviously I couldn't help but think about this past week and actually over the last few months. And, you know, at one level, I mean, I'm personally devastated by the results of the election. You know, was in Europe all week with people saying, what the heck are you guys doing? You know, and in this position of, you know, trying to explain the United States when I didn't understand what was going on. But I've actually also been trying to figure out, is there anything that I work on in organizations that could be useful? And I've come up with a couple ideas, and I'm offering them to you as exploration, right? Because I'm in the same boat as everyone else on this one, you know. But they're the things I'm going to try. So I'll just share what I've been thinking about. The first thing I've been thinking about is not something that's necessarily a GVV idea. It's actually something I take from Buddhism, but I think it's something that's influenced me in GVV, which is that I've been trying to do this kind of in and out viewing of things, you know, where I guess the short way people talk about it is think globally, act locally, but I've really been trying to think about putting this decision in a larger historical context, not as a way of abdicating any sense of urgency, but as a way of catching my breath so I can keep breathing and act in a more responsible and balanced way. I won't read it to you. I was thinking I might, but I think it will take too long. But if anyone's interested, just email me after this. The university I'm at, the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, the president there a couple weeks ago before the election, Teresa Sullivan, sent around an amazing email. You know, UVA was founded by Thomas Jefferson, and she sent around this email, which was informed by the research of one of the historians there. And there's just a paragraph in this email where she describes the election between Thomas Jefferson and John Adams when Thomas Jefferson became president of the U.S. The language and the description of what was going on was eerily familiar with this horrible name calling, people being referred to as a bunch of witches. You know, this kind of language they used back then, I guess. We don't usually use that now, but a bunch of, you know, and talking about the kind of violence and murder and raping and you know, pillaging that's going to go on if this election. I mean, it was really extreme and kind of shocked me, you know, a lack of my own historical, you know, sensibility. And Jefferson was, you know, won and actually then brought the country together in many ways. So it's an interesting example. It's this example of taking the longer view, not so that you can escape and say it's all okay, because it isn't, but so that you can actually keep acting. Okay, so that's one thing that I'm trying to do, is to kind of go in and out in terms of that.
So you might encourage all of us to, as part of what we're doing, to take a longer view.
Yeah, not as a way not to act, but to understand that, you know, people are strong, people are resilient, and we can learn from things. Another example I'll give is something that just happened to me this week in Amsterdam. Most of the faculty I was meeting with at this university feel the same way I do about the results of the election. But at the end of the day, there was a woman who came to see me, a faculty member there. She was Chinese by birth, but worked in Amsterdam at this university, you know, clearly educated woman. And she started, you know, she was a Trump supporter. And she basically started talking about all the reasons she was a Trump supporter. And, you know, at first I was, you know, thinking, well, this is really interesting. And I've had some conversations with Chinese friends, so I was interested in her perspective. She was misinformed on a few data points, but in general, a lot of what she was saying was very similar to what you would have heard from Trump supporters here in the US. You know, she was reading the same stories, etc. And it was interesting to see my own reaction, because initially, you know, I was very balanced and listening. I mean, after all, I was there on a you know, consulting trip, and, you know, but as time went on, I was just horrified by the things she was saying, right? And I was trying to offer other facts, what I considered to be the fact, you know, to help her see it in a different way. But I also realized I was getting pretty emotional, and it led me to recognize something. I'll just give one example. She was talking about some of Trump's language, sexist language, and some of the misogynistic behaviors that have been reported. And she said, and I quote, "All men talk that way," right? It's really not a big deal. And, you know, so I was upset by this. But what was interesting is that I was thinking about it, and I was thinking, I mean, I'm a lesbian, and I'm often in situations with other gays who will feel like you have to do certain kinds of things, or you're being, are expressing internalized homophobia. There are times when I have made decisions about what I'm going to act on and what I'm not going to act on. I mean, I'm out in all my work situations, but there are times when I will understand, for example, the marriage, I'm married to my partner, but, you know, for years I was the president of a gay legal rights group, and we were always making decisions about whether it was the right time to push for that. Now, we were all very clearly committed to equal rights for the LGBTQ community. And I started thinking about it, you know, perhaps from her perspective, you know, she was making that same kind of equation. You know, she was kind of, I mean, it's not how I see it, but I was trying to understand that perhaps she was thinking that all men talk this way, it's not what they mean, blah, blah, blah. And she was trying to think about what we really need at a deeper sense, which in her mind was all about economics. And she thought that as a businessman, he was going to help improve the economic conditions for other people.
Yeah.
So that was the other thing that the second thing that I learned was this idea of understanding that what people say doesn't necessarily, my equation about what values it represents is not necessarily what it represents. And the last thing that I recognized was that.
And then, Mary, I want to make sure we leave time for people to speak.
Okay, I'll just give one more.
To wrap it up.
The last thing I'll say is that I think when you're talking to someone who disagrees with you, I think it's often, there's often a very natural tendency to see for the value that you're looking for. So there's a guy who wrote a book about race relations. He's rather conservative, actually, but a very thoughtful guy named Shelby Steele. And he talked about the phenomenon they call seeing for innocence, which he basically says is a way that often in America, he was talking about race relations, there's a way that we will, as white people, we will see for innocence. We'll find ways to see behaviors of other white people as innocent and not racist. I think that there's also a way that we can see for bigotry. And so I was thinking, you know, whenever I talk to someone who disagrees with me and I hear what they say, I find a way to interpret it as they are racist, sexist, homophobic, anti-Muslim, whatever the issue is. You know, climate deniers, whatever. And I was realizing that, you know, sometimes that's not what's driving them. It may end up actually having that impact. So there might be a reason to fight and fight against it. but it isn't necessarily what they are operating, where they're operating from. And I think that helps us get to the GVV principle of normalization, which is that
Okay.
if we go to the emotional level, we can't have this conversation. We need to normalize it and understand that political differences are human, natural, everyday, important, useful, and normalize them.
So can we summarize the 3 points that you made sort of very briefly? I want to be able to hold them in my head. The first is take the longer and bigger perspective.
We'll go in and out.
Okay.
Long and close, go in and out. Don't just stay up there.
Okay, and the second is?
Let's see, the second one was when I was talking about, what was I talking about? I'm sorry. Was it the story about the Chinese woman and the Chinese faculty member?
Yeah.
Right.
So the
right.
second point is what?
Well, that I was recognizing that sometimes you can actually share a value, but be deciding strategically that at a certain point you need to focus on another value. So it's like my example of,
Okay, so you can share a value but focus on another one.
It doesn't mean that you're sexist or homophobic or whatever the issue is. You're making a strategic decision. You may not agree with it.
And the third one is?
And the third one is this idea of seeing for innocence.
Seeing for innocence. Yeah. Okay, great. And okay, so I want to open this and give each person here some time to reflect. Do you have a question that you want to offer as a seed question?
Yeah, I had other questions before, but then the election happened. So I was kind of thinking, a lot of GVV is about, thinking about if you were going to do something effectively, how could you do that? As opposed to wondering whether you can. So I was just wondering if there were any tips, any either experiences you've had already or things that you've observed others doing that you think will be helpful in dealing with the kinds of difficult conversations that we all are already having about this election. So in other words, sharing the strategies.
Yeah, so you're inviting each of us to share something that we've done, that we've observed that may be helpful in dealing with the difficult conversations in which we're engaged right now. Okay, yeah. Everybody got that? And, if we say how many of us, there are 8 of us here, if each of us can take roughly a couple of minutes, roughly 2 minutes, to share your own, I think it's a beautiful question of what has each of us learned about how to have these kinds of difficult conversations. For those of, and if, we'll think roughly 2 minutes. If someone's going on considerably longer, I may just do the reminder bell. Would anybody like to start? For those of you that I can see on the screen, just signal and, you can start this. Len, okay, you're on.
In the experiences that Libby and I have had through the years, we used to start with issues, having people talk about issues. You can imagine how hard that was with the Israelis and Palestinians, for instance. And we have found that when you talk about issues, you hit a wall. And it ends up being not what Rumi said, out beyond right doing and wrong doing. There is a field, I'll meet you there. It is not that field. It is about being right and wrong. And so what we discovered that works better with people is to first discover who is the other human being. Who are you? What is your story? And within that, why does this mean so much to you? Or what does this mean to you? How does it relate to your life experience? What does it touch in you? Because Maya Angelou reminds us that the deepest pain we carry within us is our untold story. So it seems, since dialogue is about meaning, and the same thing can mean different things to different people, we find it more helpful to begin just listening to the person's story and what has meaning for them, and even why this issue has meaning for them. So you know the other human, and that person feeling heard and being able to hear them changes the nature in the room, that makes it safer, and where everybody feels more open.
Thank you, Lynn. Beautiful opening from your deep wisdom and experience in this. Debbie, it looks like you'd like to speak, yeah? Unmuting yourself. There you go.
I just, Len, it's very interesting because that's exactly, more or less what I wanted to say that right away is that when we're discussing issues, we first have to understand the person behind the issue and really relate to the person as a person and understand where they are. And once we can see where a person is, like what's important to them, what their life story is, then we can understand what they're trying to say. And even if we disagree, just the fact that we validate another person, understand their values, it means that we can hold dialogue. So that's how I've always worked with difficult situations, and especially anything. And just on a humorous note, humor also is a very, very important part of dealing with other people. As you can share humor together, you've really broken all barriers. And one of the things I recently heard one of my friends said was, when we were in school, we always learned that anybody can become president. And we have improved. So we definitely has been shown that what we learned in school was correct. So that's...
Okay, thank you, Debbie. Anyone like to go next? What have you observed? What have you practiced as a way of a productive sharing of values in difficult situations?
Hello. Hello.
Ofu?
Yes. Thank you, Mary. My own experience is this. I have this experience that in a society we live, we are different. And in a corporate society, just like talking about corporate leadership, people in that environment are coming from different sects of life with different interests personally, and different interests in their cultural behavior, and also professional difference in their professional aspiration. And most of the times in that environment, if each and everyone in that environment do not take into account the reality that we are different from different backgrounds, you find out that there will be a sort of racial or tribal propaganda of self. And in that sort of situation, you see that different people will feel frustrated. And I come to the point you made about listening. I think the experience that we have been practicing of bringing diversities in conflicts together is to discover the efficacy of listening in transcending differences that put fear and that create the ignorance about the other in an environment that they share. So I think that it is very, very important to continue in any corporate environment or cultural environment or diverse to foster the education on listening skill, whereby everyone will have that openness to hear from the other. Irrespective, sometimes you see people calling the other minority or the other lower citizens. You find that just such kind of approach hurts. And in terms of your topic of giving values, is very necessary that in any environment we allow everyone to be heard, to create that interconnectedness. I think that will be very helpful to heal either in leadership in the corporate world or in a community of indigenous cooperation or in a religious community cooperation. I believe that it will be very, very helpful to create that link of bridge between diversities of different backgrounds of interests or values in a society. And that will give equal voices and establish mutual understanding that can build cooperation among the diversities in one environment.
Thank
That's
you,
my
Ofu.
experience.
Thank you very much for your perspective. Wendy, looks like you're ready to speak next. Oh, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I'm not quite sure how to express this, but maybe this is from what I've learned in a long history of the nursing career, but also that I tend to be a very heart-based, intuitive type of person. So I would say really demonstrating to the other person that you're interested. And a lot of that is through body language and how you hold your head, how you really look at somebody. You know, you're looking at your watch, or, you know, you're really demonstrating, you're moving forward, you're nodding. Both Len and Arya are quite good at that. You know, you really feel like you're being heard. And so I wanted to bring in the physical, the field into this as well, in terms of showing that you care. You really care what the person has to say, and you really want to hear their input. That, I think that goes a long way too, is while we're listening to people's story, is really, really looking, really demonstrating with the heart.
Thank you, Wendy. Look at Len's body language. He's the master. Hey, Jyoti, I don't see you anymore, but I see you are sending notes. Would you like to speak next?
Sure. I was doing what researchers tend to do, which is going to my sources. So I didn't want to.
Mary's laughing.
While I searched. But I've sent out the texts with the links that I was trying to find while I was not visible here. And basically, there's a short 3-minute video that I found very helpful, which is at a personal level, a woman of color explaining her experience at a grocery store, a very common everyday situation where you might encounter racism and how others can help with dealing with that situation, and how some of the things that she could have done, she could not do because of her skin color, because of her daughter watching, because of, you know, how it would be received, and focusing on a different value, as Mary said earlier. When you have conflicting values, you want the right timing and you want to know what's salient. And the other video is a longer one, which was helpful for me because I didn't grow up in this country, even though I'm a citizen here now, where a gentleman talked about the longer history of the slavery in the country and the race relations. And so I found Mary's tip on going in and out and taking the long perspective and then coming back to know what do you need to do differently because of having learned these things was helpful to me. So I've shared those links in the chat.
Thank you, Jyoti. I'll make sure that these links are available when I send the follow-up email, so you'll all have them. And I see, Debbie, that you also have seen that, that video. Halamyo, can you hear me? Let's see if you can unmute yourself. There you go. Welcome, brother. Would you like to introduce yourself and offer your reflections?
Hello? Hello? Can you hear?
Your voice is soft. Len is doing a nonverbal message to you.
Oh, yes, sir. So can you hear me right now?
Better. That's better. Yeah.
Oh, so I'm checking with my phone. That's why I think so.
Yeah.
Yes. So hello from Myanmar. So my name is Lamyo Nai and currently working for as a teacher trainer and youth leadership developers. So according to my experience and using the engagement tools, and especially about listening for the youth development, youth leadership. So reviewing the video is I really learned from everybody else for listening when I teach my students, and listening to each other is very important, but it is difficult for our students to have everyone to listen to each other when they had fears, and when they had fears to get to know even each other, and then to have a time to chat and to go and to hand out something like that. So what I think about the youth leadership is it's about relationship. So relationships, to get a good relationship between each other, so they have some barriers with different background, what they don't know about each other. So what I do here is we do like kind of social events and different kinds of culture events from different student religions and culture practice, and bringing these festivity practice into the classroom and combine with my lesson. So they had the time to learn from each other, and then they so that time they just a little bit forget about who they are in the past and what they are. So they are engaged in the lessons and the activity. And then in this ways, our youth get to know each other and understand different background and the culture and their religious practice. So why doing this? There is listening is core principles. So, but I still find some difficulty when I let my students practice different way of listening skills. But during this time, I just noted like kind of connection, using different way of electronic device and into a listening areas. So today, this video conference, luckily I just joined with you all because of the living Land's Health. So I think I really thank you very much to learn to know and to get to know everybody else from the screens. But a little bit strange for me. For this is the second time, but it's like the first time. So
thank you, Halamyo. Thank you very much, and thank you, Len. I'm sorry. Are you still? And thank you, Len, for for inviting him. I hope you'll come back and we can hear more about you and what your life and your work are about. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for this time. Okay.
Awesome. Has everybody gone except me? Is that right? Okay. So Mary, my response to your question is something I learned. Just let's see. Somebody's having noise happening. That might be you, Halamio. Maybe if you can mute yourself again, that would be good. Thank you. Something I learned from my son, Adam, in an online family conversation that was going on this past week. There were various family members, as I had alluded to, with really strong feelings. And, as it can happen online, right? So people were getting worked up and starting to hurl insults at each other. And Wendy and I decided we were just going to walk away from this. We didn't want to be there. So we walked away from the family discussion. But Adam, who's 31 years old now, he's just been reading Gandhi and reading Martin Luther King, and has sort of come to the understanding that he wants to be a nonviolent love warrior. That's who he is. So somebody would hurl an insult at him, and he would respond by saying, "I understand your viewpoint, sister. Maybe you can teach me something." And then she would get angrier. "What do you mean, teach you something? It's not my job to teach you. Why the hell don't you, white privileged male, learn yourself?" And he would say, "Well, you've got a point there." And I've been speaking and reading about nonviolence for a long time, but in this situation, I got to see my son really practicing it in a very sincere way in action, that he could cut through the insults to a deeper place and see something to really love, something that was really valuable about the other person. So he made me realize that I've got a long way to go. Mary, now that you've heard each of us sort of respond to your question, and you've been listening there, I'm interested in any reflections that you might have. And then maybe after that, there'll be some space for the rest of us to jump in with some further thoughts and reflections.
Well, first of all, thank you all. That was really fascinating and really useful for me. I was thinking when you were talking, Arye, about the Buddhist lesson that you're supposed to thank the people who are your enemies because they're giving you an opportunity to learn something. It sounds like your son was practicing that. I guess there's just two things I would say after listening to all of this that were things that I thought of as I listened to you, because I've been trying to figure out how does the work I do apply in this situation. And I guess there were two things I think about. One is that a lot of what GVV is, Giving Voice to Values, is about is, acting as if it's possible to do something. And in other words, not assuming that your organization, that it's impossible to be honest, or it's impossible to speak to your boss, or it's impossible to resist bribery, or whatever it is, but to think, as if, what if I were going to do this? How could I be effective? Because we stifle our creativity and innovation if we start from a place of certainty. And so the idea is to allow us to open up. So I guess I'm thinking maybe you can apply that in this case to this idea of acting as if the person you're speaking with, whom you disagree with on the surface, act as if you are coming from some sort of common place. That's one of the other core principles of GVV, is that obviously there are values differences, but most of the research suggests that there are some core values, the philosophers call them hypernorms, that are fairly widely shared. And that, you can start there. It's a short list and it's pretty high level. But the idea is that those might be the things that's most important for us to talk about at this point, rather than to talk about everything we disagree on. And when we do talk about it, to try and appeal to the value that we share, as opposed to coming from the language and the assumptions that come out of my particular political place or religious place or, personality place. So I guess that's the first point, the acting as if. Then the second thing is a kind of misunderstanding I encounter a lot when I share giving voice to values is that people will equate it often with this idea of speak up cultures, and people will think it's about, speaking truth to power and being true to yourself and all of that. And of course, at a certain level, it is about all of that, but it's not about that kind of adversarial voicing of values. The idea of GVV is that, on the one extreme, there's silence. I silence myself. On the other extreme are the people who speak up in my sessions and say, well, I don't need this. I always speak my values. I always voice my values. Nobody ever listens, but I always speak my values. And I always say, well, if what you're invested in is making sure you say what you think, then you don't need this. But if you're invested in actually connecting, having an impact, then that's where this is. So it's something that happens sort of between silence and that kind of adversarial assertion. And it's a place where it's much more about a question of starting from the fact that we do have shared values, but we have very different ways of implementing them. I remember when I was at Harvard Business School, I taught a course on diversity. And I remember the day we talked about affirmative action was the most contested day. And finally, the only way I got people to speak, they either were going to argue or say nothing. And so finally, I just drew a line down the middle of the board. And I said, for a minute, I want you all to pretend you're vehement opponents of affirmative action. What are the values that drive you? And we made a list. And I said, now I want you all to pretend that you're vehement supporters of affirmative action. What are the values that drive you? And we made a list. Now, of course, they were the same values. They were fairness, justice, equal opportunity, meritocracy. So I said, look, this doesn't make this conversation easy. But what it does shift here is that this is no longer a values conflict. This is an implementation problem. And it made it a little bit easier for us to at least talk.
Interesting. Yeah.
Those are the things I would add now.
Thank you, Mary. I want to open it up to any further reflections from, any of us here. In your case, having listened to all of us, what additional reflections do you have? Debbie, go ahead. You need to unmute. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Okay, it's difficult to mute me, but okay. On many levels. I think one of the important things of having conversations with people is to understand that we're not better than anybody else, not looking from a place of being supreme above other people. And it's very, very difficult when we think we're right. I will give you just a very simple story. I'm going to close this because I had a friend of mine who had an argument with her husband, and she was yelling and screaming at him. And he kept on looking at his very religious guy, and he say, "Thank you for giving me an opportunity to work on my characters, on my mitos, on my characters." Now, my immediate reaction was, if my husband were ever to do something like that to me, I would yell and scream at him more, because I would want to give him more opportunities to work on his character development. That's, in other words, when you're, this is a phone call from out of the country, so I have to get back, but that's the main point.
Okay.
Can I just say, before I forget, that for Debbie, it's a Bank Hapoalim is the bank that I worked with in Israel.
Bank Hapoalim, yeah. The workers' bank. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Somebody signed off. Who signed off? Anyway, Len, looks like you're ready to speak. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Just Mary, thank you again. I think your last point was one that was one of your most relevant, and that is that it seems so helpful to go into a relationship as if the other person does want to work it out. And it seems like after working with quite a few people, that inside of a person there is a longing for reunion. And I think it's safe and true to say, assume that a person, and express it, that person is a principled person, that people want to be principled, and to begin a relationship by acknowledging that and dignifying people is important. And to me, that's been a source of faith to move into the most difficult situations, knowing that the other human being has a longing to be the best person that person can be, and does want to be a principled person. And to explore that person's principle seems like such a good way to start. And you just awakened that in me again. So thank you for that and for today a lot.
Thank you, Len. Jyoti.
Thanks, Len, for that comment. And inspired by Arya's story about Adam and nonviolent communication, I'll share my experience as a single parent of a teenager. The best advice I got was to not take it personally when my teen was asserting himself in ways that felt personally damaging, as to how outdated and stupid and all those horrible things, that I had nobody to counterbalance that and remind me that I'm okay as a human being. And the best tip was to not take it personally, to know that teenagers do this in America, and give him the safe place to express himself. So if he said these things, my response to him was, I love you too.
Wow.
Because he felt safe enough to express it, and he knew in that confident way that this relationship has enough common ground that it's not going anywhere to act out in those ways. So if I could just remind myself, and rather than get angry and walk away in a huff or start yelling back and getting engaged with that teenage drama, which many times I did, but when I could remind myself, I would just say, I love you too, son. And that would change the energy right away.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Jyoti. Any other comments or reflections? You know, I've got one just personally. I've noticed, I don't know if any of you experience this, but I've noticed that when I'm in a room with people and emotions are starting to run high and people are saying things I disagree with, that it's very helpful for me to just sort of switch to self-awareness rather than thinking about what the other person's saying, to switch, what am I feeling now and what's going on? And when I can switch, I'm feeling threatened, I'm feeling angry, I'm feeling judgmental, whatever it is, then I can take a deep breath and kind of step back from that, that package of feelings. And then I'm ready to focus more objectively on the other person and try to respect and honor who they are. And that's my reflection.
I want to add to that. In my experience and becoming an advocate for listening as an important leadership skill, I've experienced that a lot of times when people come and talk to you, the only thing you need to do is reflect back and say, oh, I noticed that you're very upset about this, or I noticed that this is very difficult for you, or whatever it is that they're expressing. And that's all you need to do, because then they figure out what they need to be doing. So that's where leadership comes in, as listening comes in as a good leadership behavior, because if you really listen and just are present for them fully, it somehow magically works itself out for them. And that's similar to what you're saying, that self-awareness helps you, but sometimes you need somebody else who helps you by just being there to listen and say, what's going on for you? Or this is what I see is going on for you, and that releases it completely.
Thank you, Jyoti. Wendy, looks like you'd like to speak. You need to unmute yourself. Yeah.
That come to mind. One is in whatever spiritual practice that we have that enables us to stay calm in a situation where we are disagreeing or we are receiving anger from other people, to whatever that is. It's a reminder for me to practice that. And also just really creating a safe environment. And I'm sure that Lamo must create a very safe environment for his kids, his students that he's working with, so that they can feel comfortable, and connecting with each other. And whatever needs to be done in the environment, or whatever, bringing food, whatever, just creating that safe space. And also what we've learned is a space that it's not a free-for-all, so that people can take their turn in terms of talking, and that ground rule is nobody's doing interrupting while that person is talking. That, for me, has helped me personally to feel comfortable talking in groups, because I know that there's a safety factor there. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Lamo, any further thoughts from you? I don't know, Lamo, can you hear me? Oh, there you go. Yeah, okay. Any further thoughts from you?
I learned a lot of the listening activities. It is very effective for me, and very useful whenever I work with my students, because before I do my lesson planning, and I try to have their comments and feedbacks, and then we set up that place to speak of openly and freely between, even I'm a teacher and my students, so that I can have the good idea what they like me to do and combine with my lessons. So that as a teacher in my classroom, I feel I'm a kind of like leader to my kids. So I model the idea that I want my student to do. And then this idea, I design the lesson is come from their feelings and their interests and their environment. So what I do as a leader with my students, so I try to listen. I do listen, and then sometimes I feel very fear when some of the students, they may talk about where I'm so weak, and so weak in the public. But at the same time, I learned myself to face this challenge, to overcome. This is not who I am, but this is what I had to do. So this is the way I learn from listening to be more mature and to improve myself. So adapt what I'm doing. So that's what I really like to improve and use. The listening is the best way to work with the others. Thank you.
Thank you, Olamo, and I look forward to learning more about your work. Let's see, I think we've each spoken a second time except for you, Ofu. Any further thoughts to add?
I want to deeply appreciate every reflector in this gathering who have contributed. The emphasis that is made on listening skill, and it continued to strengthen my awareness and my motivation to continue expanding the education on listening skill here in Ivory Coast as a very important tool in community relationship building. I am so grateful that anytime I connect to this gathering, I'm always inspired and well enlightened to this point. I want to say thank you to everyone who has enriched me so much in this gathering. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ofu. I'm noticing that it's almost half past the hour. There's one little thing that I've seen on the chat, that there was some discussion between Jyoti and Debbie that about trying to, I think Jyoti wanted to understand something that Debbie had said a little better. Do you two want to just take a moment to sort of do that? No, we'll do that offline. Okay, yeah, not a big deal. So anyway, Mary, I want to say thank you again so much for joining us. You know, what I really get is that the work that you do is kind of on a very macro level with very big organizations, and how to get communications to happen. And the range of conversation today, you know, has been from the macro level to the very sort of immediate personal level. And I think that's a beautiful thing, that we can, to use something you were advising, to sort of be able to zoom out and kind of see that perspective. You know, that each of our personal conversations is part of a larger. Hey, Ofu, could you mute yourself a little bit? Thank you. That all of our conversations, you know, are sort of occur in various contexts and various frames. And I found this very beautiful. I want to say thanks to each of you for taking the time to be part of this. I also want to mention that we are starting, for those of us in the US who are sort of wanting to talk more about what do we do now after the election, what kind of America are we living in, what kind of Americans do we choose to be right now. We have this OWL group called Being American Now, and I think some of you have chosen to be involved. If anyone wants to be involved in the Being American Now conversation, it'll be a Zoom conversation similar to this format, but we'll focus on that. Please let me know. Normally what I do after these circles is I'll edit the video and get it down into a bunch of smaller videos and then post them on the website and then let you know. I'm very busy the next 2 days, so I can't promise that result until Tuesday. But what I will do in the meantime is this whole big hour-and-a-half video. I can post that later today. And I'll send you all a note when that's available. And then I'll send a note when the edited version is available as well. Anybody have any last thoughts before our final moment of silence? Anything you want to share very briefly? Len, okay, you're on.
I think that this conversation today has been exceptionally valuable and important. And having worked in Africa, in Nigeria, and in the Middle East, and we think of Islamic State and Boko Haram as somebody cruel and different that has to be crushed. But it is not different than what has happened in the US elections, except that because it is so magnificent, this election, it gives voices to those who we do not even know exist and who are unheard. And it really is our task now to all over the world to listen to everybody, as we've talked about today, and to find out who they are and not have to say, who are those people? Because they're humans and everybody has a story, and everybody, we can all take from the principles that Mary has awakened here today, and bring people together and not just talk about it. So thank you so much, Mary, and each one of you a lot.
Thank you, Len. That's a beautiful closing. Before we say goodbye, let's take a final moment of silence to be here with each other. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Mary. Thanks to each of you, and love and blessings, and go forth and have a good rest of your day, rest of your evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Mian from Mia, I love the work you are doing in Miami. I will study about your success stories, and we'll keep in touch.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone.
Lynn,